Today we are talking about persuasion. There are two chapters in the text that talk about persuasion, and today we're going to talk about the first of those, which is chapter 14. I want to talk about what persuasion is in general with reference to the persuasive speech assignment that you'll be doing. Particularly, I want to talk about logos, ethos, and pathos, and about theories of motivation. In general, the act of persuasion is the act of trying to change or reinforce a person's attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors. Particularly in this class and in many examples of public speaking to persuade, we are obsessed with the concept of action. We're focusing mainly on changing behaviors and less explicitly on values, attitudes, or beliefs. We're interested in those only in as much as they influence action and people's behaviors. That's why that's why the textbook touches so heavily on theories of motivation, trying to motivate action. So these speeches that you'll be doing are not opportunities for kind of vague, abstract, philosophical debate on something, but rather we're focusing on policy. What should be done, what shouldn't be done, and why. We're trying to persuade us to adopt some new course of action or some new behavior. The textbook talks about several ways of doing that, several theories of motivation or motivating action. Cognitive dissonance is one of them. And cognitive dissonance is a fancy term for the sense of psychological discomfort we get when we suddenly realize that our actions don't line up with our beliefs. We feel discomfort in that situation because all of us are motivated to be consistent in our actions and in our beliefs. We want to feel like we have this consistent worldview, and so when we suddenly realize that what we're doing doesn't line up with what we're saying, we're motivated to either change our beliefs or to change our actions. And so the theory is that people will change their actions when we realize that they're out of line with our beliefs. For example, someone might say, well, do you want to be healthy? Do you want to have a healthy lifestyle? Then why are you eating so many hamburgers? And that's a simple example of trying to highlight the fact that our actions, the things we eat, don't line up with the things we know about health and the things we desire for ourselves. The text also talks about positive motivation and negative motivation. This is basically the difference between the old saying about the carrot and the stick. If you're trying to get a donkey to move, you might try to lure it along by holding a carrot in front of its nose, and if it still won't move, then you might go behind it with a stick and try to make it move that way. Positive motivation paints a picture of how good things will be if the audience will only adopt the policy that the speaker is advocating for. And negative motivation paints a picture of how bad things are and how bad things will be unless you do what the speaker is trying to get you to do. In all persuasive undertakings, there are elements of logos, ethos, and pathos. And the Greek philosopher Aristotle first laid this out in his book called The Rhetoric. I'd like to touch on those 3 points because I see them as central to persuasion in general. Let's start out with the concept of ethos. I think that's the one that the text covers first. Ethos doesn't translate directly into English. There's a number of concepts that are associated with it. One of those concepts is ethics, the speaker's ethics, but I think it's more precisely translated as persona. A speaker's ethos is basically the same as the speaker's persona. Does that speaker seem competent? Does he or she seem confident? Does the speaker seem like he or she has the best interests of the audience at heart? Is that person believable? Is the person dynamic? All of these things are what is meant when we talk about ethos. When people think about public speaking classes in general, or public speaking, we tend to think about things like eye contact, whether or not we smile, if we are good at using hand gestures, if we're dynamic on stage, if we have charisma. When you give a speech, you always dress up for your speech. And all of these things have everything to do with ethos, because they're trying to increase the audience's perceptions of your competence and your credibility as a speaker, your goodwill and your honesty. If you speak smoothly and if you deliver well, people are more likely to listen and believe the things you're saying. You're more likely to be successful in a persuasive attempt if you have a high level of ethos. So that's why throughout the course we've focused on, how do you organize your message in a way that makes it clean and crisp, and how do you deliver a message in a way that makes you appear credible and audience-centered. All of that has to do with ethos. Okay, so ethos was the first one we talked about. The two remaining ones are logos and pathos. If ethos is a little bit hard to understand, logos and pathos are easier because they translate a little bit more directly. Logos is logic, and pathos is emotion. Every successful persuasive attempt has to use all three of these things. You have to be a credible person, have a credible persona, that's ethos. You need to use strong logic, and that's logos. You also have to have some emotional appeal as well, because we are not brains in vats. We are human beings, and emotion is an important part of what it means to be a human. And so when we're talking about emotion, we're talking about pathos. The text goes into great detail about different methods of utilizing logos. If you're citing statistics, if you're making arguments using inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning or causal reasoning or any of the other types of reasoning we have at our disposal, then you're using logos. We are a very numbers-driven society. We put a lot of stock in arguments in science and so on. So logos is important. Pathos is also very important, and it's tempting sometimes to try to discount pathos. A lot of times there's some suspicion of emotional appeals, and people think, well, if you're trying to just play on my emotions, then you're not being honest. And I think that that's a misconception. Every important issue activates our emotions. That's the way it should be. That's the way it ought to be, and that's the way it is. And so it's okay to get fired up and to try to get your audience fired up in a visceral, emotional sort of way, because without emotion there is no passion. Without any passion, there is no motivation to change. And remember, our persuasive goal is to try to motivate change. So it would be a big mistake to try to leave out any emotional appeals. Of course, we wouldn't want to manipulate our audience's emotions, just like we wouldn't want to we wouldn't want to abuse logos by being dishonest in the facts that we portray, and we wouldn't want to abuse pathos by trying to manipulate emotions rather than to fire them up in a natural and healthy way. So as you read throughout the text and as you consider these three things, note that a successful, well-balanced, persuasive appeal will contain elements of ethos, a strong presentation, a dynamic, charismatic persona for the speaker, logos, strong logic and good reasoning skills, and pathos, a healthy sense of how the audience feels about the topic and being able to harness that emotional energy to activate change in whatever direction that you were trying to get them to change. Okay, I look forward to delving into how to organize and put together persuasive messages a little bit more in the next video mini lecture, and I look forward to seeing some of your comments in the discussion boards and in the topics that you choose to talk about for the persuasive speech. Keep in mind that we're putting an emphasis on action here, so the point of your speech will need to be to get us to adopt a new policy, to start doing something we're not already doing, or to change what we're doing, not simply to change the way we think about something or our attitudes, but the speeches should be connected strongly to the some action or some policy. You'll see more about that in the assignment sheet. For now, happy speaking.